They are going to buy you cars and give it all of you, no longer want to give you money. I'm okay with it.
To say that you're going to fight corruption is very good. It makes people feel good. Like when you say people are going to go to heaven, people feel good even if they die and they don't get anywhere.
Deeply incisive.
So the conversation really should go beyond this particular view to say how should we adjust our budget in light of the lockdowns.
Authentically symbolic and insightful.
It is easier to be an analyst, but statecraft is another skill. We should also respect those who are running a state, even when we are giving them feedback.
Behind the Headlines, every Wednesday at 10 p.m. with Charles Odong.
I will repeat it, 0709 602 592. That is the number that you should send us a message through so that we can interact with you and read your messages.
All on your public broadcaster, UBC, inspiring Uganda.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
It's a cool morning here in Kampala. Looking outside my studios, I see the weather is very welcoming. I won't say it's sunny, but in case you're coming to town, make sure you're well versed with what kind of weather will dominate the bigger part of the day. Again, I'm Robert Chirabonyonitano. Thank you for being with us on UBC TV right from the hour of 6:30 when we began our transmission until now. That is in Good Morning Uganda Extra, an extension of Good Morning Uganda. Now, today we are going to be discussing something that I find very relevant because at one point you or me will move out or will cross borders, either for tourism, for academic purposes, one is just going for a visit or anything, but you end up migrating or leaving Uganda. And who knows, at one point, someone is going to come into Uganda as a visitor, as a refugee. Of late, we're having so many refugees because of insecurity surrounding us. And all these are governed by what we call immigration policies. Now, in Africa, we have issues of immigration, actually all over the world. And sometimes the immigrants go through tough times. Others find a smooth sail. A research was carried out in Uganda, and this report is going to be launched tomorrow that talks about more regarding immigration and our immigration policy as a country. Many times when we are discussing topics regarding influx of refugees, we always say Uganda has one of the best refugee policies in the world. Why? Because it makes it very conducive for them to come in here. There's free movement, they get employed, some are given chunks of land to cultivate, and all these are issues surrounding immigration. Now, joining me on set, I have two guests that have taken time to read, to understand issues to do with immigration. And I have Professor Edward Garabuzi, who happens to be from the institute, that is Makerere Institute of Social Research, and he's the acting director, but he's also one from the Uganda Council of Foreign Relations, and he's a man who has taken good time in understanding issues of immigration and our policy as a country, and contributed in a number of research that has been even taken to international levels. Professor, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Robert.
And then on my extreme end, I have that is Professor Andrew Geddes, who happens to be from the European, that is University Institute, based in Italy there, and he's also a professor who has specialized actually in issues of immigration, and for some time. And we are delighted to have him in Uganda here, of course, working together with Professor Edward here. Professor Andrew, you're most welcome to Uganda first, and also to our studios.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Well, I'll begin with Professor Andrew. When you look at you all the way from Europe, well, I know Garabuzi is one of us here, and he's done quite tremendous work, issues of immigration. What brings the European University Institute and now also to come together with the Makerere Institute of Sociology and also Research?
I think two reasons really, Robert. First of all is to learn, because I think Europe also has a lot of migration history. People have left, people have moved to Europe. Immigration policy is a big issue in Europe, but Europe also interacts with other regions, and its interactions with African countries is really important. So I think it's important that we come to learn more about what happens in Uganda, in the wider region, about what these issues mean here to people and their lives. So we want to learn, and to learn, the second reason we're here is to collaborate. We need to work with people. Because I've worked mainly on Europe and some other parts of the world. I don't know a lot about East Africa, the Horn of Africa. I know these are important issues, so we need to cooperate with people. We need to take on people's perspectives and see these issues from the perspective of Uganda and from this region, because I think by doing that, I understand more about the issues, and so that's why, to learn and to cooperate.
I love those two reasons, learn and cooperate. Moreover, knowing that immigration has no boundaries. A person is in Uganda today, tomorrow they will be in Europe. And maybe they carry the same problems or face challenges. So I love that so much. But also, for the time you've been trying to learn, what do you make of our immigration policy as a country, the little?
Well, I think one of the things that is very striking about Uganda, as you mentioned at the beginning, Robert, is the very famous refugee protection policies that developed here, which are world-renowned, and which I think actually European countries could learn from in terms of how people may be given greater possibility to become self-reliant and to have opportunities. And I think that's something that Uganda can show to the rest of the world. And other countries are very interested, and also in this region, other countries are looking to Uganda's approach. So I think that that those, as I said at the start, I don't see myself as an expert. I'm here to learn. So, but as somebody from outside, I already understood that aspect of Uganda's approach. And what we're finding out more about is the number of people from Uganda who are now looking for opportunities outside of Uganda. So within the region particularly, so moving to neighbouring countries, but also, as Professor Galabuzzi said, moving to countries in the Gulf. And I think that's a really important thing. That's the report that we're going to talk about tomorrow, has quite a strong focus on that, and the research that Professor Galabuzzi has done.
Professor Galabuzzi, you've done this research, but even before we dive into the research, which we really want to know what it's all about, when we talk about immigration, given Uganda's perspective, away from that dictionary definition of it, how would you best understand immigration?
So, thank you for having us here. First of all, immigration is a very Ugandan phenomenon. In many ways, it tracks with our history. Perhaps the earliest, I think in the Ugandan memory, the earliest concern with immigration had to do with people coming into Uganda from Rwanda in the late 1950s because of the disturbances there. And then we had to absorb them. And so at a very early stage, there was that policy question of what do you do with foreign nationals coming into the country. And so it is really on that basis that we sort of built a policy that eventually becomes what Professor Giddis is referring to as one of the most progressive policies when it comes to absorbing people coming from outside the country into the world. But Uganda has also had many years of instability. So Uganda has also produced immigrants, people who have left the country to go into neighboring countries, both for safety but also for economic opportunity. People who have left the country to go into far lands, Europe, the United States, Australia, looking for asylum. I happen to have been one of those people who left to go look for asylum, and I was away for quite a bit of time. So in both cases, both as a receiving immigrant receiving country and an immigrant sending country. Uganda is an immigrant country in that regard. And so the issues of the policies that have to do with how we manage that, how we systematically deal with the reception as well as an absorption, as well as the sending, are really important. And for the better part of our history, people who have left the country have left almost informally, right? What we're doing now, increasingly over the last 15 years, since the policy came in place, is we've formalized the process of quote-unquote externalizing labor, because we've recognized the potential that external labor has in terms of bringing remittances back. Significant amount of money, up to about 4.8% of Uganda's GDP in 2020 came from remittances coming back from countries in the Gulf, countries in Europe, countries in America, and other places. So in the National Development Plan, there's some recognition of the contribution that is made by those people who have left the country and are sending money to their relatives and sending money for investment and for projects. There's also recognition that particularly the young population, which is not sufficiently absorbed into the labor market, is finding ways to look for employment elsewhere. So both as an employment response, as well as the possibility of remittances, we have systematized the process by which people go outside. The other component to this is that we also, because we have this diaspora of people who have been going out for many, many years, we are also now increasingly looking at the possibility of how do we resettle Ugandans who've been outside of the country for a long time.
Where many don't even want to return.
Well, some
you
want to
find
return.
them and they tell you, I'm best. I love it when they come home and someone tells you, I'm best in the United States.
Yes.
I'm best in this. You're like, well, you're best, but this is home.
Yes, and the interesting thing is that even though they might be best in the United States, or even though they might be best in Britain or in Italy or in Australia, they do have the capacity to support development here. And some of them choose to come back and be best in two places. They come home and for a period of time, spend time here, and then they go back and spend time there. So the phenomenon of having more than one home, which is a phenomenon that you probably are familiar with. As Ugandans, we've always had this more than one home. We have home squared, right? Here and in the village. So this is another, I think Honorable Peter Sematimba talked about his home squared being in California, right? But he spent most of his time here. So they have a contribution to make. And I think that is another element that's important to discuss.
Well, we're looking at issues of immigration, more so immigration and mobility in Africa. And when we talk about immigration and mobility, one thing that comes to my mind is, have we created a safe environment? And since one of my guests, that's Professor Andrew, said he's here to learn, but also share experiences. Professor, let's also have an opportunity to learn from where you're coming from. Issues regarding immigration policies have always been hard, much as sometimes states would want to have this smooth transition, but they have an impact usually on the indigenous people. How have this been handled in the country where you come from? Today in Uganda we are praised and we have one of the best refugee policies any country would want to talk about, but you'll find issues that the locals will tell you, this is by infringing on our resources. At some time we've even begun, we treat you very well. What happens when we come to your country? What has been your experience from your country of origin?
Well, thank you, Robert. It's a very, very good question. And actually, in a way, I'm from two places because I'm British, but I live in Italy. And both of those countries have been affected by immigration. Britain, it began in relatively large numbers after the Second World War, Italy more recently, but in both countries it's a very important point, which is the relations between people who arrive and people already there. And there's no easy answer to these questions. They're complicated questions. But what I would say in both countries, first of all, is the importance of kind of perceptions and people. The perceptions people have of the effects of migration can be really important. And I think what Professor Galabuzzi has done for his research is mobilize the facts and the evidence. But often the way that people feel about change around them is really important. And it has to be taken seriously in the sense that, you might say, well, here's some facts, here's some figures, you need to change your views because of these facts and figures. But how people feel about their lives and change around them is important and needs to be taken seriously. I think that's a lesson in Europe, where immigration has been a very divisive issue, where political parties have been successful, which have talked about immigration and particularly have been against immigration. And they've tried to mobilize support by trying to profit from anti-immigration sentiment. People are opposed to immigration, and I think there's been a sense that some of the ruling parties in Europe have not taken people's concerns seriously. So what I'm trying to say is that these perceptions matter, but the experience of change that people have is important, and I think it's and so research like we've contributed to, and Professor Galabuzzi has authored, is a way to bring evidence to that debate, but also because this is such a human phenomenon, to understand how it affects people's lives and take concern seriously. So what we can say, if we look at the overall impacts of migration, typically they are positive. They bring benefit. It can bring benefits, but that's not just to say, well, it's positive, it's beneficial, we should embrace it. Because there are also issues and challenges and problems, and they have to be taken seriously as well, because fundamentally this is people's sons and daughters, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers. It's a human phenomena, and we have to understand this kind of human dimension of it and understand how it affects people's lives in a very personal way. So I think that the experience in Europe has been difficult in recent years, because of the way it's become a very divisive issue, setting people against each other, leading to conflict, leading to division, and I think I think that's probably a lesson other countries will probably try to avoid, is dividing people around these issues, and trying to find ways to build bridges, and to understand that there are benefits, but there are also problems, and they have to be, you can't just say, well, to people, here's some facts, here's some evidence, you need to change your opinion. You have to take people's concerns seriously, because a lot of people have, we're experiencing a lot of change, a lot of insecurity, a lot of instability. The economy, across the world now, we're experiencing difficulties with rising prices. That's not a result of migration, it's not the fault of immigrants, but that can become a cause of division. So I think that if I was looking at what's been happening in Europe, you would say that the potential for societies to become divided is quite significant and needs to be probably something that people in authority need to be cautious about.
I love the fact that you bring out there are a number of benefits to this, but how do we mitigate the problems that can result into this? Now, Professor Galabuzzi, this brings me to your research. Yes. At such a time, I'm triggered to understand what have been your findings. Can you give us a brief spark of what others will get tomorrow? But let's have that now.
So the study is called Migration Governance and Migration Diplomacy, an agenda for a migrant-centered approach. The idea was to look at what we can do about the question of migration. So I started with talking about the need to systematize the way we deal with migration, which means we need to have a policy framework that ensures that we're looking at every aspect of the phenomenon of migration. Now, the report identifies both the things that we are doing well and some things where there are gaps and we need to build so that we have the capacity to address the challenge, some of the challenges that you identify. What are we doing well? We're doing well clearly on absorption of the people who are displaced from countries like Southern Sudan, the DRC, but also countries like Somalia, Kenya, Eritrea, even Rwanda and Burundi. We're doing very well. We've done that quite well. The United Nations came out with a comprehensive refugee response framework, and Uganda is really the test case of that framework. And we had a meeting here, the United Nations and other people had a meeting here in 2017, at which about $1.2 billion was committed to implement the framework. Unfortunately, although Uganda is both a willing participant and partner, not all the money has come in. Not all that money was coming to Uganda, but we are.
I remember Uganda, we had the Refugee Solidarity Summit.
Yes. at
Speak Resort.
Speak Resort, yeah. We have a gap of about 58% of what we need to implement it effectively. So a lot of what Uganda has done, it has done on its own. And it's still waiting on the partners to come through. A lot of it is the goodwill of people in the various communities where people are being settled. And these people are mostly being settled in rural areas, right, where there are other challenges. But Ugandans have the capacity to be brotherly and sisterly, and we've demonstrated that. We need for our partners to meet us halfway. Secondly, Uganda has actually been more open and aggressive when it has come to the East African community and its project to try and free mobility across the countries in the community. Uganda has rules that allow for people to come from Kenya and Tanzania and elsewhere and look for employment here. I think I said earlier on that we have 1.7 million people coming from outside of the country. 1.5 million of that are refugees. The other 200 or so thousand are workers coming from the other countries to look for economic opportunity in Uganda. We certainly need for that to be reciprocated, and that's important. Where are the gaps? The gaps have to do with how we are dealing with people who are going out to look for employment. In particular, we have now groups of young women who are going for domestic work in particularly Gulf countries. The numbers, according to the agency that brings together the recruitment agencies, about 140,000, right? And I mean, most recently we had like 28,000 go in one country to Saudi Arabia. So we need to deal with the question of how are they being recruited, how are they being prepared, where are they going to work, under what conditions and what terms are they going to work, how do we ensure their protection, right, their civil and economic rights. And so that's where we need to do some work. The report identifies gaps in that regard. The report also identifies some gaps in terms of the need for the government to reform the Employment Act so that some of these ideas can be implemented. Ideas around protection of migrants in particular can be implemented. The report also identifies gaps around some of the informal traffic, that some of it goes through the agencies, some of it goes around the agencies. And those are the people who we often refer to as being trafficked. Mostly women and many young. It is surprising that perhaps a third of the people who are trafficked, the most recent a study showed that about 660,000 were trafficked out of the country in 2021.
That's a big number.
A third of that are young people, right? Young people. So we need to interdict those processes of trafficking, and part of that has to do with the work that we need to do around the policies and collaboration, coordination with the other countries around East Africa, but also collaboration with countries, for instance, in Europe and countries in the Middle East, where many of them would end up. The report also identifies a gap in the way in which we have worked across the ministries that are important in dealing with immigration, right? Gender and labor, internal affairs, so the people at Directorate of Citizenship and Immigration, foreign affairs, for instance, the Office of the Prime Minister, and all of these have a contribution to make to ensuring that we have a strong and vibrant migration governance regime. And we're not there. There is a national coordinating mechanism that was established that brings together the officials from different ministries. But it is not as vibrant as it needs to be able to meet the policy need that we're doing. We need to collect data on migration, on employment. So we need to establish systems that allow for us to collect the data that we need to be able to address some of these challenges. We do want evidence-based policy making, so we need to collect that data. We also need to deal with the private employment agencies. There's been a proliferation of those agencies. There are over 200 of them. So you can imagine if you have that many agencies that are operating mostly on their own, although they are supposed to be regulated by the External Employment Unit. The capacity at the External Employment Unit to regulate them really does not exist. The External Employment Unit is understaffed, is under-resourced, and clearly needs to be strengthened. So we need to do that. One of the areas that I think is really important to look at is the question of what is the nature of the contract that a Ugandan woman or a Ugandan man signs before they go to Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or to Jordan or to Qatar. What is the nature of that contract? Do they understand the contract?
Well, those women this is a person that is desperate for employment.
Those women that we recruit from Kamuli.
Though many we hear they have interpreters to make sure that they understand what they are going for. But of course, there is one who is vulnerable, a person seeking for a job.
Absolutely.
Usually they are more vulnerable, and also when they are not empowered, with also worsened by the education levels. That a medical doctor, you can look at your terms and conditions. But what are the terms and conditions for someone who feels at the mercy to leave the country, and in their mindset they are going to earn a fortune for them to look through and say, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that. But allow me to go for a short commercial break. When we return, Professor Andrew and Professor Galabuzi will still be looking at issues of immigration, how best we can improve them, more so the safety, and how we can secure the immigrants. We'll return shortly.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Are you a player in the tourism sector with a struggling business following the COVID pandemic? UDB, in partnership with European Union, is providing financial assistance to businesses operating in the tourism sector. You can access subsidized loan with grants, loan with a tenure of up to 5 years, free business advisory services, and free environmental impact assessment. Visit www.udbl.co.ug/call for applications to apply. Deadline for submission is 31st October 2022 at 5 p.m. For more information, please call 0414 355 509.
National Council for Higher Education will hold the 4th Annual Higher Education Conference on the 14th and 15th September 2022. The conference theme is Enhancement of Teaching, Learning and Assessment with Ordeal in Higher Education. The guest of honor will be the First Lady and Minister of Education and Sports, Honorable Janet Kataha Museveni. The conference will be held physically at Hotel Africana for only invited guests and open to online participants via Zoom webinar that will be shared under the events section at www.unche.or.ug. The keynote speakers are Ezra Nazim, Senior Fellow of Higher Education Academy UK, Professor Henk Gerald Sola, a Dutch organizational theorist and Emeritus Professor of Business, Engineering and ICT at Groningen University, the Netherlands. The National Council for Higher Education is receiving papers from researchers and scholars for publication in the Uganda Higher Education Review, Journal of National Council for Higher Education. For more details, send inquiries to cmuhumuza@unche.or.ug, info@unche.or.ug, or call 0783 04 0024 or 0704 80 0926 plus 256 39 32 62 140/4.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Welcome back from that short break. It is exactly a few minutes to the top of the hour, and thank you for being with us here on UBC TV. I'm Robert Chirabonyonito. In case you've just joined, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra, and we are looking at issues of immigration and governance. How is it safe? What are our policies? And of course, there's a research that was done by Professor Grace Edward Garabuzi, that is from Makerere Institute of Social and Research, and he came up with a number of findings. But also, we have Professor Andrew Gids, who happens to be from the European University Institute, and that is based in Italy, who has specialized in issues of immigration, and he says he's here to learn, but also share experiences and improve, that is coordination, cooperation, because issues of immigration are not limited. Someone will move from one part of the country, you hear someone who will tell you have traveled out all over the world, and you're like, are you serious? Yes, then they mention a number of countries they have been to. You're like, oh God. Another one tells you, I was once in this country looking for peace. In my country it wasn't safe. So how do we ensure that all these people enjoy their stay, have free movement? Of course, we won't remove some bilateral relations and all that, but basically, what are their policies? Are they good? Do they secure the people? And even apart from those that come into these countries or leave these countries, what is the relationship between them and the indigenous people? How do we balance this? Not only to treasure those that are coming, but also think about what does this mean to the people that are already existing. And this is what we are discussing. Professor Garabuzi, before we went for this break, you're still giving us more of the findings of this report and the key areas that you feel have to be addressed immediately.
Yes, so along with some of the other things we talked about, the need for a national labor migration policy, the reform of the Employment Act, the need for to strengthen the national coordination mechanism, support for the external employment unit. I was talking about the need for better regulation of the private employment agencies, because there's really the vehicle through which many of the people who are going to, particularly the Middle East, are going. And if we're going to secure, protect them, ensure that both their travel and their work is safe, it's important for us to regulate these agencies. One of the things that has come up is that a number of people have been abused when they've been in the Middle East. And some people have even lost their lives. There was a story just the other day that said about over the last 2 years, 88 people had lost their lives. And so we don't want that to happen to our young people who are going, particularly mostly young women. And so we need to ensure that there are protections, there's proper regulation of the people who are recruiting them, but also ensure that the government has strong consular presence in those countries. Now, what the government has done is it has worked with the employment agencies to set up an office in Saudi Arabia.
Attaches, they usually refer to them as attaches there.
Yeah.
Attaches there. Yes.
But there's a bit of a tension between their responsibility to the Ugandan population there that is working and their responsibility to the employment agencies themselves, right? So if the employment agencies are paying for those attaches that you're talking about, then they're more likely to resolve issues of passports, people losing their passports or passports being taken away from them, or people being abused in their homes, in favor of the employment agencies as opposed to the individuals. So we want strong, more robust consular presence in those countries. That should be the role of the government. That should be the role of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. We also want the labor organizations in the country to be involved in the process of preparing those young people, because they will train them, they will give them the human rights training that they need so that they can be protecting their own rights, right? And we want organizations such as the Uganda Council on Foreign Relations to also participate in the process of making the kinds of policies that will strengthen our capacity for us to manage migration. I think if we do some of those things, I think we'll go a long way in making sure that we are protecting those people, that Uganda is benefiting from that migration. I think we also need to coordinate better with the other countries in the region. And what the African Union and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development and the East African Community have done is they've set up a number of instruments and protocols that should be, that ought to be what we aspire to. The best case scenario is represented in those protocols. So we need for the government and we need for Uganda to participate in those. The last thing I want to say is that this should not be just the government's responsibility. This should be a whole of society responsibility. And part of what we say in the report is that the migration governance regime needs to be migrant-centered, right? That the voices of the migrants, the people who are the subjects of these processes, should be central to what we're doing. So it shouldn't just be people in government making
technical
decisions.
experts coming out thinking and planning for them, yes.
And you find in the report that we have brought in the voices of a number of those women who are out there, who are telling us what the experience is like. They're telling us about what it was to be recruited, how they went through the process, how they got there, what happened to them when they got there, some of the challenges they met, how some of them were very resourceful, how they were able to overcome some of those challenges, right? And they have ideas about what the government should do, what the employment agencies should do, and so those ideas ought to be central to the process of
Professor Giggs, seeing you present in Uganda, you say there's a bit of learning, but what do we stand to benefit from this cooperation between, that is the European University Institute and also Makerere Institute of Social and also Research? What do we stand to benefit in terms of immigration policies, in terms of better atmosphere for not only Uganda but also Africa in general and the world, if there is?
Yeah, well, I think there's quite a lot of potential for benefits, mutual benefits from cooperation. So one of the things, I mean, this is my second visit to Uganda, and I live in Italy. And Italy is a country that's aging. And when I come here, I see a country where the population is very young, very young. It's, you really notice it coming from a country where people are getting, the average age is nearly 50, to come to a country like Uganda. And so one area where cooperation, I think, can be really important is in the development of younger people. And so the European University Institute is very committed, not only in Uganda, but working across African countries to promote African leaders. So we have a program at the European University Institute where every year people from across Africa spend some time in Florence, in Italy, where we are based, working with experts at the European University Institute, and then obviously returning to their own countries to develop their careers. So I think one area where cooperation can be really important is around the development of younger people. It is very striking as a European, the age profile of the population here and the potential that means, and also the possibility that potential might not be fully to benefit the country and to those individuals. So I think that's one area where we can cooperate. Around immigration, well, I think there's as Professor Galabuzzi has been saying, it's important to, you can't devise the perfect policy, have some framework which is 100% effective. You can trial and error and experiment to see what works. But I think what we can cooperate around are precisely the things that Professor Galabuzzi talked about. First of all, thinking about an approach which generally tries to be inclusive of a lot of voices, because migration is an issue, it's an internal affairs issue, but also gender, labour, social development, foreign affairs, and various other agencies of the government, but also private agencies, and of course individuals. So it's a complex field, and I think to be effective it's got to reflect the range of voices that are included, to take this whole of society approach. And I think that we can cooperate to promote that, and we'll have a meeting tomorrow where we are going to hear from a range of people from Uganda, from regional organisations, to think what that means. And secondly as well, really important that to put the migrant, the people who move at the centre of this. When I arrived yesterday in Entebbe airport, I could see a flight going to Dubai. I could see the people getting on that flight. And that brought home immediately to me what Professor Galabuzzi had been writing about in his report. These processes are about younger people moving abroad because they want to improve their lives. They want more opportunity, they want more money for them and their families. And it's really important that their experiences inform policy and their protection is at the centre of approaches that develop, and I think that's where we can cooperate to help to develop these kind of approaches. And tomorrow we'll have a meeting where we will try and, well, it's not just words on paper, try and promote this agenda that's in the report.
Well, very message of hope if we can have this put in place. In the interest of time, Professor Galabuzzi, let me have your final remarks regarding issues of immigration and, of course, the report that is going to be launched tomorrow.
Thank you, Robert. So, I think I want to take this from the point of view of the particularly young people. Uganda is a very young nation. You know that. Half the population is under 15 years old. They are making decisions to look for opportunities outside the country because we are challenged in terms of our capacity to absorb how many people, over 700,000 people, come into the working age every year. The economy is challenged. We have had growth in the economy, but it is one of those scenarios that is referred to as jobless growth, right? So the jobs are not there. So they are making personal decisions. And like you said, they're putting themselves at risk. But they're making decisions that make sense. Because if they are going to be, those contracts that I was talking about, generally 2-year contracts, and the promise is the average 900,000 shillings a month. The likelihood that you'll get that in even some professions like nursing and teaching, we've been having a discussion about teaching, is slim. So these are very attractive possibilities for these young people, right? So we need to make sure that we are creating conditions that allow for them, once they make that decision, to be safe and secure. And to also recognize that if they're safe and secure, they will return to us support for their families, support for, they will do investment, again, up to $1.2 billion a year. That is really significant in terms of its impact on the economy. So we need to provide them the capacity to be able to make those decisions, once they make those decisions, to execute those decisions. Part of that falls on the government, part of that falls on us as a society. As Professor Gillies was saying, the sort of whole of society approach. Part of that falls on organizations that have been organizing workers, for instance. Part of that falls on organizations that have been organizing domestic workers here, because many of those who are going are domestic workers. The component that is the domestic workers is much higher. So we need to support them by providing a policy regime and a policy infrastructure that ensures that they can be successful once they make those decisions, as well as the ones that are coming home, to receive them, to provide them integration that is successful.
Well, Professor, it's your parting shot.
Well, as I said at the start, for somebody like me from Europe, we should be here to learn, here to collaborate. But I also think that there are lessons that we can, or experiences we can bring that can help inform a debate in a country like Uganda, which is in some ways has already been successful in relation to a refugee policy. But now I think with labour migration, there's enormous potential. There are some traps and some problems, and they need to be taken seriously. And I think what we would like to do through our collaboration, cooperation, and the meeting that we'll have tomorrow is think very seriously about this, because fundamentally this is about younger people in Uganda with hopes and aspirations and ambitions, and putting in place frameworks that allow them to try and reach their objectives, but also in ways that protect them and their safety, so that they're not in danger. And I think that's really important at a human level. And so we're very happy to be able to cooperate, very honoured to have the opportunity to contribute to the debate tomorrow. So thank you, Robert.
Well, thank you so much. That is Professor Andrew Gillies, that is from the European University Institute, and that is in Italy, and Professor Grace Edward Garabuzi from Makerere Institute of Social and Research. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope that the findings of this report will be used to come up with better policies that will improve issues of immigration in our country. Have a lovely day. God bless you. Stay safe.
Live from UBC